How many of you want to save the world? Put it way up. If your hand is not up, what the hell are you doing at ESF? Think about it. All right? Why are you here? You're here because you care about the future, I hope. We're going to try to give you some tools for caring about the future. Welcome to Global Environment. I think that this is one of the most important classes for you to have at ESF. The reason is that most of the courses you take your first 2 years, if you haven't discovered by now, are kind of preparing you for the great courses you're going to have when you're a junior and senior. Well, this course is jump in, feet first, up to your neck, fully into issues of the environment, fully into issues that probably for most of you are related to the reason that you came to ESF in the first place. The best things about the class, some would say, is if you like my style, you get Dr. Hall full in your face. The worst thing about it for some people is that I insist you be involved in your own learning. We at ESF emphasize field experience, laboratory experience, and in some classes like this one, your own involvement in your reading. So, what does Simon say? And why does he think things are going to get better?
He says something about nuclear power and that it's going to pretty much solve all our problems.
Nuclear power, for example, will solve all our problems. Okay, what else?
The environment will be healthier.
The environment will be healthier. It's obvious to me that the water quality in New York State is better than when I was an undergraduate at Colgate in the early 1960s, okay? Rivers are cleaner, much cleaner in Maine. Good deal, huh? What else? Yes, sir.
He thinks lands will become less of an asset compared to housing. He's like speaks the exact opposite of that.
Land will become less of an aspect. Why?
Less of an asset because he thinks the technology is going to overcome the use of the land.
That's the big word for guys like Simon is technology. What does Simon say about population? Yeah, there's not too many people. 6 billion people. No big deal for Simon, right? He doesn't care. 12 billion, 100 billion. He doesn't care. More people will have more creative minds to solve more problems. That's the technological cornucopia. Who's got something to add on Simon? Yeah.
Mike, he also bases predictions on countries making a lot of money and then wanting to spend that money on fixing environmental problems.
Oh, yeah, this is like we're doing these days, huh? Oh, yeah. Right, no turmoil, right? And spending more money on the environment. Exactly what we're doing this year, right? What does Hansen say? It says around 2005, oil production will peak. What happens when oil production peaks? This is called a Hubbard peak. It's the rate of use over time of a non-renewable resource. Now the question is, Hansen thinks that we're somewhere right around here on the Hubbard curve for the globe. Where are we on the Hubbard curve for the U.S. oil? Who knows that? Yeah, that's about where we are. We peaked at about 7 billion barrels a year in 1970. 1970. How many of you were alive in 1970? U.S. oil production. U.S. oil. Hey, I was there. U.S. oil production peaked before most of you were born. How many of you knew that? Don't you think it's about the most important fact that you could know? How come you don't know that? What's wrong with our educational system? Now, what happens when the U.S. goes over here? Didn't matter much. We imported all this oil. We're still growing, so we import that oil from other countries. My research is on that at the moment, but that's another point we'll hear about later. What happens when we go over the global peak? Well, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. The main thing is almost all of our environmental problems are bailed out with cheap oil. We erode our soil, We put out nitrogen-based fertilizer that we make from oil and gas. We have problems with overfishing our fish. So we send our ships to Antarctica to catch them with cheap oil. We have a loss of biodiversity, so we correct for problems of missing species with different kinds of fossil fuel technology that we call wildlife management and so forth. The issue is almost all of the environmental problems that we have, we're bailing out with cheap petroleum. So what happens when we go over that global hump? I don't know exactly. Maybe Simon is right. Maybe people will be inspired to come up with new technology. What do I think is going to happen? I think the shit's going to hit the fan. What does that mean? Well, we're going to talk about it. Is it necessarily the case? No, not at all. But we have to think about it very carefully. I lived when oil was cheap, when penicillin worked. I came along in between the pill and AIDS, one magic moment in human history. Think about it. I came along when my country was the most powerful country in the world. I came along when I could hop in the car and go fishing, which I love to do any damn time I wanted to. Never had to worry about the price of gasoline. And I came along where we had cheap jet travel. So I'm an international ecologist. I go all over the world, depleting the world's petroleum resources, supposedly in the name of saving the environment or something like that. Man, I had it good. The question is, what's it going to be like for you? And so what we introduce here, what we're interested in trying to teach you, is what we call a systems approach. And a systems approach is many things. You're going to read about it in your reader and so forth, but basically it means not looking at simply the one obvious aspect of whatever it is that you're looking at, but to learn how to make diagrams of the total process that's connected with the issue that you're looking at. How many of you know about shade-grown coffee? Who can explain the virtues of shade-grown coffee?
You don't have to deforest areas.
You don't have to deforest. It's sun-grown versus shade-grown coffee. All right, so the idea is with shade-grown coffee,
there'll be less deforestation.
Less deforestation. But the idea is that shade-grown coffee is going to give wildlife a chance. And you can grow coffee underneath the canopy of a tropical forest, and you can then have your coffee and have your bird diversity too, and that looks great, right? All right, how many of you think you should be drinking shade-grown coffee? All right, how many think you should? All right. The thing is, I've had a graduate student who looked into that problem, and here's what she finds. Yes, it is true that shade-grown coffee has will have greater biodiversity, more birds, and will be less deforestation. But you only get about 1/3 of a ton per hectare. A hectare is 2.5 acres. Use metric system in this course. You only get about 1/3 of a ton of coffee per hectare. So that means if you compare that with sun coffee, you get about 1.5 tons per hectare. So you get about 5 times more coffee per hectare if you use sun coffee. And because shade coffee is dark, it's damp, less sunlight gets in there, you have to use more fungicides on them. So it's not true that it's necessarily environmentally more benign. It's an issue. So if you have to use 5 times more land in which you reduce the bird diversity by 30%, if you could take the sun-grown coffee and use that to produce, for example, 100,000 tons of coffee that Costa Rica makes, then you could take the other 300,000 hectares and conceivably put it into natural vegetation where you'd have even higher bird diversity. Or maybe they're going to take that and put it into some other crop or some worse land use. You can't answer it. But the simplistic answer, oh, we all got to grow, all got to drink shade-grown coffee. It doesn't work that way. You got to do deeper analysis. Let's take another example. Well, how about smoking? How many of you smoke? All right, now is it environmentally good or bad to smoke?
It's good for the environment, it's bad for the user. It thins the population.
Good. What's your name?
Danny.
Good, Danny. Okay, now, that's not good. But it's true. You smoke, you'll live on the average 4 years less. You consume 4 years less. You'll shit into the water 4 times 4 years less. You will consume oil 4 years less, etc., etc., etc. Is that how we want to approach this? No, but it's true. All right? Now, I hope you guys don't smoke, because I hope you're out there making a difference. Let's try another one. How many vegetarians here? Let's try this, vegetarians. How many hunters here? Well, about equal. Okay. What does it mean for the environment if you're a vegetarian? Go ahead.
Because, first of all, you don't have to, instead of growing crops in order to sustain the animals that meat eaters are eating, they can use those crops instead to feed
There's
the
a trick,
population.
you're there but not quite. What's she missing?
90% of energy is lost in the
Okay,
eutrophic
90% of the grain that you feed to a cow is lost through the cow's excrement and metabolism and everything. So you get less production, 1/10 or 1/5, the production from a cow that you would get by taking the same amount of grain and feeding it directly to a person, except if you put the cow on grass that wasn't going to be harvested anyway, there's an argument that you're just using an additional resource. It takes about as much energy as you get out of corn to grow the corn. In other words, if you get a calorie out of corn, you got to use a calorie for the tractor fuel and to make the fertilizers, and you have to use a calorie of oil to make that calorie of corn. And for beef, it's maybe 10 calories to make 1 calorie. So in that way, again, it's more energy intensive. Well, I want to tell you how difficult the problems are that face us. There was a beautiful study that's just been done in Sweden for a doctoral thesis by a lady named Alfredson. Sweden is a very forward-thinking country in many ways, very progressive, maybe my ideal of what a country should be like. And they, as opposed to ours, and they have a list of an environmentally good diet. And they have a list of environmentally good transportation, ways to do transportation, to save carbon CO2 release, you know, CO2 in the greenhouse and all that, and to save energy. And so, many Swedes follow this environmentally benign way of life, because many Swedes are very conscientious about their life. So what she did is she went out and interviewed 500 Swedes that followed this environmentally conscientious life and 500 Swedes who just were average Swedes and didn't. And what that meant was that the environmentally conscious Swedes would, instead of having a sausage for supper, would have brown rice. You guys know all this stuff. And instead of having a fish, they'd have granola and so forth. Or a potato, or something that the Swedish Council of Nutrition had determined was a low environmental impact food. And what she found was that, in fact, the people, and incidentally they did the same for transportation, and what she found was that, in fact, the people who followed the environmentally benign life, when she did her calculations, released about 13% less CO2 from their eating and similarly from their transportation. And they also save more or less a similar or a little bit less amount of energy. Looks good, right? So these Swedes have less impact on the environment, right? Right? It would seem that way, but you're wrong. Because what she did is she found also that the Swedes who live these environmentally benign lifestyles saved 15% of their income. And at the end of the year, on the average, they took an extra vacation. And even when they used the environmentally benign transportation, they ended up releasing more carbon dioxide in a year than the matched group they're compared to, than the average Swede. The easy solutions are not necessarily going to work. We have to think much, much deeper. If the take-home income corrected for inflation increased by 1% a year, it didn't matter what all Swedes ate or what they did for their transportation. You could not possibly reduce the amount of CO2 released into the atmosphere. Your environmental impact is almost directly related to your income or the disposable money you have to spend. Now, I'm running for president on that platform. How many are going to vote for me? Not even anybody in this class, apparently. Well, remember that. I want you all to think what are the most important problems facing the earth. A war. Ooh, put that up there. War. Yes, indeed. Overpopulation. You got that, Katie? Frivolous lifestyle. Yes. Privatization of water. Apathy. Solid waste. Overexploitation of natural resources. Investments. Extinction rate. Increase of extinction rate. Okay, biodiversity, that's part of the biodiversity suite of problems. I mean, there are other issues to biodiversity. My favorite is that buffalo, American bison are not extinct, but they don't have the ecological function they used to have. And cows are much tougher on the soil. They keep hitting. Urbanization, and we'll just use that for more extent. Ignorance of global events. Chemical aspects of food production. Tom, risk perception. Global warming, good. Got to get that one in there. Courtney, energy crisis. Ozone depletion. Toxic waste, good.
Loretta, land diversion.
Loretta, land diversion. Okay, they're starting to be a little bit overlapping, right? Like toxic waste are part of waste problems and so forth. Okay, now let's try to put this together. Let's do a basic flow diagram, an energy flow diagram of the U.S. society. So, what's the energy that, this is the source, what is the energy that runs society?
The sun.
Sun. Number one, the sun. Okay, sun. Okay, here's either the world or the U.S., take your pick, economy, which is an ecosystem. The economy is a type of ecosystem. So what happens is that the solar energy enters our ecosystem. This means an influence, and we pour in fertilizer that increases agricultural production and puts all kinds of, well, let's call this natural ecosystem here, puts all kinds of waste into the natural ecosystem. The natural ecosystem is cut down to make the agricultural system. Why? Why is all of this happening? Well, hang on. You go a little further and there's animals, cows and chickens and stuff, and then there are people. What's driving the increase in agriculture and the increased use of chemicals in agriculture?
Population.
Increase in population?
You said people.
Yeah, increase in population, so we have a feedback. This feeds back, and accelerates, these are little arrowhead signs, accelerates both the conversion of natural ecosystems into agricultural ecosystems, and it indirectly causes all of these impacts down below. Now, in addition, in order for this society to run, we need to have, make it a little, well, I'm not going to make it bigger. Here's a factory. The fertilizers actually come from this factory, and so what we make this a little more accurate, I'm sorry to change it in midstream, but I'm not happy with the diagram there. What we have is that we start with oil and gas, run it through a factory, and generate the fertilizer that way, and all of the other chemicals that we use in society. And what is driving all of that? Again, it's the human population increase, but it is also the increase in per capita affluence. So we tend to eat meat every day, as opposed to we tend to eat meat once a week. My great-grandparents maybe, except they lived on a farm, but it was, they would eat less. Okay, garbage is coming out here in various ways, and all the garbage that comes out of all of the producing products. And you don't even see this garbage because it takes place somewhere else. And increasingly, for example, we make our steel. If you buy a Pontiac, the steel was made in Korea. Pittsburgh used to have the filthiest air quality of any city in the world, and that's because it made steel. But now we make the steel in Korea and Mexico, especially Korea, so you don't see that filthy stuff. So we've cleaned up our air, rah, rah. But when you buy a General Motors car, the steel tends to have been made in Brazil or in Korea. So you got, that's all of this globalization right here. That's part of it. We are exporting, because we have higher environmental standards in this country, we export these things to other countries. So if this is the US, for example, then we have exchanges with trade which bring up a whole series of very complex issues pertaining to this. Extinction increases have to do with changing more and more of our natural land to agricultural land, and let's put this as just the urban, including suburban and whatever, landscape. As people become more affluent, they like to live spread over the landscape. So one of the main issues that we're going to address in this class is the important issue of urban ecosystems. Because our urban ecosystems, the cause of the problem because of this tremendous concentration of people, or are they a solution to the problem because the more you pack people into cities, the less they impact the general environment around them. Okay, now, ozone depletion and energy crisis have to do with this, and have to do with the emissions both from agriculture and from industry. All of these other ones, ignorance and risk and so forth, that's what we're working on in this class. Investments have to do with where do you put your money to accelerate this or accelerate this or accelerate something else, or accelerate educating you. What? Do you like this lecture? Yeah? Don't you think everybody in SU should hear it? Yes. Think everybody in the world should hear it? Sure. And 40 more? Well, we're going to try and make it so anybody in the world can have access to this class. Like that? Yeah.